everybody. It is Tuesday, October 22nd. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Winonu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, in Mean Girls, there's the scene where is it Regina George is just standing there as the chaos unfolds around her in the school.
Yes. With the burn, when she rips up the burn book.
Right. She's just standing there and the people are like beating each other up and the kids calling her like, Mom, I'm scared. Like,
Mom,
like,
pick me up. I'm scared.
Exactly. So I just got sent a meme as we began taping this being like, oh my God, this is the election. This is the American election. Like you're just standing there and like the world is, unfolding the way it is. Because, I don't know how many of you follow us on Instagram, but, yesterday I posted a couple clips and we had conservatives who are like, oh, my God, you're so pro-Harris because you're not posting this. And then I post it. And then suddenly the Harris people are like, oh, my God, why are you amplifying this? This doesn't matter. And I was like, I can't win with any of you people. I'm going to just stand here in the back of the hallway and watch each other beat you up in the comment and watch all of you guys beat each other up in the comments.
Moshe, I love any reference to Mean Girls, and I appreciate it enormously. But it is kind of sad that that's where we've... Not kind of sad. It is really sad that the discourse has gotten to that point where we can't just agree to disagree, that we can't kind of see the other person's side and talk.
Put politics away and also just put it away, right? Like it has infected everything. And it really annoys me too, as somebody that considers themselves very rational and I'm like, and self-critical, right? Like, yeah, that side screwed that up. That guy screwed that up. And people are like, how did we get here? And I was like, I think, we've talked about this before. Politics has become religion to people. And just fair warning here in these final 2 weeks of the election, folks, you're going to see a lot out there. You're going to see selective editing. You might see some fake videos. You might see some stuff taken out of context. In fact, you will. And so people are just reinforcing their own beliefs and they see what they want to see. And I would love to get to a point where people can admit that their side is not perfect. The other side is not perfect. And by the way, the other side might have some good points. And that is the way we can get to a solution here. So anyway, I appreciate all of you who listen to this podcast. I appreciate you, Jill, who joins me in the back of the hallway, watching everyone.
And laughing about it. And trying to find the humor.
A little bit of laughing, yes.
We like to think of this podcast as two friends talking about the news. And for everyone out there, we consider you our friends. So you're in on the conversation.
Yes. Thank you, friends. We're here with you to hold your hand through the next couple of weeks.
And with that, Moshe, let's get to the headlines. A deeper look at presidential polling this cycle with 2 weeks to go, whether we can trust the numbers.
Yeah, we'll break down some of the numbers here, some of the analyses, and tell you where the polling errors went the last couple cycles and what we can expect, what we think we can expect this time around.
Overseas to the war in Ukraine, where Russian troops are getting some help from the North Koreans, what that means for the war.
Yeah, some increasing concerns there about North Koreans there on the battle lines in Ukraine.
Back here in the U.S., a big trial underway. Veteran Daniel Penny on trial in New York for the fatal subway chokehold.
Yeah, you might have seen that viral video last year. The trial begins now, and there's already some controversy.
Visiting the White House, what to expect in the new expanded tour. And we're not talking about the Mo News tour, which you could definitely do, Moshe.
Jill, I will say you and I took a White House tour. So with this added feature, we got to go back.
And New York City restaurant owners are facing a big new challenge. Turns out Gen Z doesn't know what happy hour is.
At least that's the claim. We'll try to get to the facts here.
Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill will tell you about the first all-female group to reach #1 on the Billboard charts. Can you name them? Well, it happened on this day in history.
All right, to our top story. 2 weeks until Election Day, and there's a lot of focus on the polls and whether or not they are accurate. Heading into the final weeks before Election Day, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are tied, according to the latest USA Today Suffolk University poll. So this survey puts Harris at 45% and Trump at 44%, a closer race than the poll found in August. Back then, in the wake of the Democratic National Convention, Harris led Trump by 5 percentage points, 48% to 43%. Trump is favored on the economy, immigration, and foreign policy. Harris is favored on healthcare and abortion. It's a similar story that we have seen in a number of polls. So we've told you about many of these polls in recent months. And so it is a topic we wanted to take a bit of a deeper dive into today, since many of you ask us every day, can we trust the polls?
Multiple times an hour, Jill.
So here's some perspective. National polls on average are aligned pretty closely with the popular vote, which Hillary Clinton won in 2016 and Joe Biden won in 2020. But of course, U.S. elections are not determined by who gets the most overall votes. Instead, of course, they are determined by the Electoral College. So winning enough states to get to 270 electoral votes. A dive into the polls in the handful of battleground states from the last two cycles finds that is where pollsters underestimated Donald Trump's support in those key swing states. So that's why Americans and many in the media were surprised by the result in 2016. State polls overestimated Clinton's support, and we know, of course, that Donald Trump won. Now, notably, the polling at the state level was even more off in 2020, again, overestimating the turnout for the Democrat. But in this case, it was Joe Biden. And since Biden still won, people didn't really think much about it.
So revelation number one, while we often look back at 2016, it's actually 2020's numbers were even more off.
So this year, amid another very tight presidential race, even a small polling miss could vastly misjudge the outcome. And now we should note that every cycle, the polls diverge from the election results to some extent. It is inevitable when pollsters can only make estimates about who's going to actually show up to vote. Some people only make up their minds in the voting booth, and then bombshells could drop late in the race, which means it would be too late for polling. So that's why the margin of error in every poll matters. And when things are this close, you can effectively call it a tie. Looking back historically, it doesn't always go in one direction. For example, in 2012, polling overestimated the Republican vote for Mitt Romney and underestimated the Democratic vote for Obama. Again, the last two presidential elections instead overestimated the Democrats and underestimated Trump. Going back to 1988, the final national polling average was off by an average of 2.3 percentage points. The state polling misses have been magnified in the last two presidential elections, just given how close the elections have been. But the poll's performance in the past two presidential elections, not entirely unusual. A look at the state polling misses since 2000 shows that the polls of older elections did about as well as today's polls. Since 2000, polls in close states have been off by an average of 3.1 points.
So perspective there. There is a margin of error. Nationally, the polls have been off by about 2 points. The state polls have been off about 3 points. And Jill, it comes as most polls right now show a difference of about 1 point, 1 or 2 points, which shows you that it could go either direction here. And it's important to note that, again, historically speaking, some years they're off for Republicans, some years they're off for Democrats. But the last couple cycles here, they've been off both times that Trump has run. This, of course, is now his third straight election. So let's look back. Back in 2016, what happened? Well, the major culprit when pollsters look back at the issue was that they failed to account for voters' education levels. That was the first real election where we saw this divide between voters with a college degree going heavily Democrat and voters without a college degree going heavily Republican. And he also brought out a number of voters without a college degree who hadn't voted before. And so they were not accounted for by pollsters. Like we tell you many times on the Instagram account, we like to use the soup analogy here, that you don't have to poll 350 million Americans. You don't have to poll the whole pot of soup. You just have to make sure the soup is mixed up. So when you take the spoon in there, the poll is the soup, that you account for the things in the soup. So you got to make sure you have a piece of celery, a carrot, a piece of chicken, etc. in the soup, so you know how the soup tastes and you have a good sense of the soup. What happens with pollsters? They have to predict there are going to be this many carrots voting, this many pieces of celery, this many noodles in the soup. And if you don't mix it up enough, you might then take a taste. You're like, oh, this tastes okay. And then you actually
more salt, please.
More salt, please. Or, oh my God, I put in way too much celery into the soup. How did I not get to it? Well, you didn't get to the bottom there of the pot. So the point being that pollsters, the carrots in 2016 were non-college educated voters, right? Voters with a high school degree. They accounted for that in 2020, or so they thought. They'd begun accounting for education there. But then you still have an issue in 2020. Like we told you, the polls were even more off in 2020. We thought, you looked at the polls going into Election Day, and it looked like Biden was going to win pretty comfortably. And it turned out to be closer than we thought. So what happened? Take two here of Trump in 2020. Well, by 2020, there's a belief that Trump supporters are less likely to respond to surveys, so they were unaccounted for. There's another theory of the case in 2020, which is that we went from about 125 million Americans voting to 150 million Americans voting. So 25 million more Americans voted. Now, there was a sense that more people were going to turn out in 2020, but the theory of the case from the pollsters was that most of those votes would go to Joe Biden. Well, it turned out that all the new voters who hadn't voted in 16, who showed up in 20, went about even to Trump and Biden. So again, a polling error. What is polling? Polling is a calculation of who's going to vote. So that's 2016. That's 2020, Jill. There was interesting analysis done yesterday on CNN where they said, okay, well, if you go off of those errors, then Trump will win by a few states here in 2024. But look at 2022, our most recent election. Now, it is a midterm election, no presidential. But what happened in 2022? If you look at that polling, the polling error was back to being in favor of Republicans. So if there's a 2022 polling error, then Kamala Harris is going to win by a slightly comfortable margin on Election Day. So 2016, 2020, advantage Trump. Polling error like the last go around, 2022, advantage Harris. Again, we're now 2 weeks out, so we're not going to know how this all went down until after Election Day. But just a little context for those of you who are always kind of digging into the polling here and asking us about it.
Bottom line is, go out and vote. Every vote counts. Go out and vote. This thing is too close to call.
This thing is too close to call. Ultimately here, there are a number of paths that Harris has, a number of paths that Trump has. And recall, by the way, that a number of these states, literally it came down to 11 or 12,000 votes in Georgia and Arizona, and states where you have more than 2 million people voting. That's not that many people. That's a very small town, 10,000 people.
And most early voting has already started in a lot of swing states, and they're all reporting pretty much record turnout so far.
Yes, they started voting in Texas yesterday. We heard from some Mo News community members who stood in line for up to 2 hours, Jill, to be able to vote. We are now at numbers I saw as of yesterday. I think we're at almost 15 or 16 million Americans that have voted early. So ultimately, we could already be at about 10 to 14% of the turnout has already cast their ballots. Another reason when you think about polling accounts for today, right? But what about all the people who voted a couple weeks ago when Harris was slightly more up in the polls? So even the polls that you see right before the election might not account for what you see, even if there's a surge for one candidate or the other, based on the fact that in some cases, in some of these states, people voted back in early September.
Time for the speed read from the Associated Press. Let's start with a concerning development for the war in Ukraine, where there is increasing intelligence that North Korea is joining the war on behalf of Russia. South Korea's spy agency said last week it had already confirmed that North Korea sent 1,500 special operation forces to Russia this month, all to support Moscow's war against Ukraine. And more are on the way. Ukrainian President Zelensky said his government had intelligence that North Korea is prepared to send more than 10,000 soldiers to join invading Russian forces. It comes as Putin's forces are depleted. Russia and North Korea have been getting closer and closer. Zelensky delivered a video address this weekend saying that, quote, a new threat has emerged, the malign alliance between Russia and North Korea. If the world remains silent now and we face North Korean soldiers on the front lines as regularly as we are defending against drones, it will benefit no one in this world and will only prolong this war.
Yeah, a warning there from Zelensky, and it comes as the U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin visited Ukraine yesterday. Zelensky is asking for more help here, saying he's very concerned about this new North Korean threat, the reinforcements here that they're bringing to the Russians. The Russians are losing an estimate of 1,200 soldiers per day, Jill. And this, whether it's a couple thousand or 10,000 North Korean soldiers, it's a relative drop in the bucket, but still significant here. And it's unclear how much more there is to this secret alliance here between Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. Of course, we covered the trip that Putin made several months ago to North Korea, but it was unclear exactly what this alliance was going to look like. And it appears the two are getting very close here. There's concern from the South Koreans as to what Russia's doing in exchange for these soldiers. The analysis right now is new missile technology or new submarine technology for the North Koreans. So a lot of concern there from the South Koreans, from the Japanese. about what Putin is giving Kim in exchange for not only the soldiers, but also all the artillery, the armored vehicles. I mean, North Korea has been sitting on a lot of weapons for decades here. The Russians are running out in some cases, so they've literally been begging for bullets, anti-tank weapons, and in this case, soldiers. So we'll be watching the major headlines that come out of the Lloyd Austin meeting here. It's probably his last visit to Ukraine during the Biden administration. And depending on who wins, that could change a lot of the dynamic here because, of course, Donald Trump has promised to end the war between Russia and Ukraine in 24 hours. He hasn't said how he's going to do that, but he said he's going to end it immediately, while Kamala Harris is vowing to continue the Biden strategy here of sending weapons to Ukraine and reinforcing their defense against the Russian military.
All right, from the New York Times, the trial began Monday in the case of a former U.S. Marine who was accused of putting a homeless man in a fatal chokehold on a New York subway train. We first told you about the case of Daniel Penny last year. He has admitted to putting Jordan Neely in a chokehold, but pleaded not guilty to charges of second-degree manslaughter and negligent homicide. Witnesses said Neely, who would sometimes perform as a Michael Jackson impersonator, was shouting at other subway passengers and harassing them for money. Penny said that Neely was ranting about being hungry and desperate and was poised to kill someone. Penny said he had to be stopped and pinned him down for several minutes in the subway car, eventually killing him. According to prosecutors, Penny's actions became criminal when he refused to let go of Neely long after he had gone limp. This all happened in May of 2023, and it quickly became a political flashpoint, with conservatives praising Penny as a hero and critics, including civil rights activists, saying that he acted as an unjustified vigilante. And there is also a racial element to this, since Penny is white and Neely was black.
Yeah, this violent encounter divided the city and divided a lot of folks across the country. Some New Yorkers said that Penny's actions reflected transit riders' fears and frustrations. Crime rates at that time on the subway were higher, and so there was a lot of tension, a lot of concern among subway passengers. Crime rates have since gone down. There has been a big push by the NYPD. But at the time, again, 18 months ago, there were regular reports of people being shoved onto the tracks, assaulted on station platforms. So everyone was really at high attention at that point. But others, the critics here, have said that the killing showed the city's inability or unwillingness to help its most vulnerable or marginalized residents. Again, Jordan Neely here was homeless at the time. And so prosecutors say that Penny may have acted out of fear, but in the end, they say he failed to see Mr. Neely's humanity. So a key piece of evidence here, among the things that they'll be going through in the 6-week trial, is a 4-minute video. You've seen elements of this probably online over the course of the past year. It includes the final 50 seconds when Penny kept holding Neely even after he went limp. So prosecutors will be calling a number of witnesses who were in the subway car that day. Again, we expect a several-week trial here. They're going through jury selection over the course of the next couple of days. It's expected to last. And if convicted, if he's found guilty, Neely could face 15 years in prison. So this is a trial we'll be closely watching.
From ABC News, for the first time in decades, visitors to the White House will experience a major change to the historic building tour. That's all thanks to a revamp led by First Lady Jill Biden. The transformation is 2 years in the making, and it brings to life the rich history of the building through a more enhanced and immersive experience with interactive displays and 3D renderings. Jill Biden telling ABC yesterday, being an educator, I walked these halls every day, and I thought to myself, you know, we need something that's more vibrant and comes alive and, you know, just so much more dynamic. As an educator with 40 years of experience, the First Lady highlighted the importance of interactive learning, noting the 3 primary ways of how people learn: visual learners, auditory learners, and tactile learners. So they've tried to address that all throughout the tour, so that if you have one strength or another, that is how you learn.
Yes, you'll take away something. Jill, you weren't bored on the White House tour, were you?
Not only was I not bored, I was loving every second of it, because I had never been to the White House, and I had the tour guide, and I also had the real tour guide, Moshe Vanunu, who was in my ear giving me like the real scoop.
Yeah, I'm like, that's not true. They totally missed the story on that president. There's a much more interesting version of that story.
Here's the juicier version of what actually happened.
Like, did they tell you about the fist fight the guy had outside the White House? Anyway, we took this tour, but great to hear that they're continuing to update the tour and ensure that it's interesting, especially to younger generations there, with more touchable artifacts, digital displays, etc. Because, you know, it's these ornate rooms with a lot of paintings. and pieces of furniture. But ultimately, here, the upgraded tour will be designed to offer a deeper, more engaging experience. They actually worked with the History Channel and with the National Park Service to upgrade this. So it'll include a 3D rendering, apparently, of all the renovations over the years. Because, even the West Wing is a new thing that was from the early 20th century, post-Teddy Roosevelt. Until then, the White House, that kind of main building, was where all the action happened, where the president worked out of. They lived there. You could walk in from the street, and then they built out the whole West Wing. So there's a lot of interesting history about how all these rooms were used over time, how the various presidents updated things. We've done a whole deep dive on this on the Mo News Premium Instagram account. Talked about how Bill Clinton added the hot tub. FDR added the swimming pool. GFK had the swimming pool, used the swimming pool, including with some interns. And then eventually, later presidents didn't see a need for the swimming pool. LBJ, I think, was the last one. Then Nixon replaces the swimming pool with a bowling alley. And then you added the press briefing room where the swimming pool used to be. Anyway, if you guys do the White House tour, definitely before you do that, check out the Mo News Premium deep dive on it, so you get the stuff that they might not tell you about, even with Jill Biden's updates to the tour.
Yes, I will say, Moshe, that all of the details that you provide definitely bring the rooms to life.
But for the record, Jill didn't consult me on these updates, so we'll have to go take the tour and see how the updates go.
And finally, from the New York Post, is happy hour still a beloved American pastime or an old school activity that Gen Z is confused by? New York restaurateurs say kind of both. Eugene Rem, co-founder of Catch Hospitality Group in New York, is catching some heat for his recent comment saying that Gen Z is killing happy hour. He recently told the paper, people used to work from 9 to 5 and you were happy at 5:01 because your workday ended. But since the pandemic, when many Gen Zers began their careers, there is no beginning of work and there is no end to work. He guesses that about 95% of 20-somethings who would have typically gone to happy hour, if this was just, say, 10 years ago, now look at someone asking them to go to one and say, hey, boomer, I don't know what happy hour is. Also of note, Gen Z is also just drinking less. Some are instead smoking marijuana, which is increasingly legal, or using other substances and avoiding alcohol. We have told you about alcohol-free bars opening up in places like New York.
Yeah, so back to Eugene Rem here. He is finding ways to be innovative. Apparently, he's opened a zero-proof place called the Corner Store, offering unique drinks, alcohol-free, to try to cater to the Gen Z crowd. As far as Gen Z is concerned, though, they're pushing back on this. They're like, listen, we know what happy hour is. Why is the media always treating us like we're aliens? We know what it is. It's for friends after work. It's not for coworkers. So they're adapting happy hour, so to speak. And many of them sort of joke about the fact that happy hour may have in a bygone day. Jill, I remember happy hours 20 years ago when we were getting out of college, where it was like $1 for a beer. And you could get some real deals in happy hour. Today, with inflation, et cetera, they're like, oh, your happy hour price is $1 off or $2 off. Why am I coming to your happy hour? There's nothing that special about it. We should note, we did talk to our in-house Gen Zer, Lauren, who writes the newsletter and works on our Instagram account. And she says that young people in New York work late. So meeting friends on a weeknight will usually be for dinner or drinks, not happy hour. Though she does note that she previously lived in D.C., and she says that happy hour culture in D.C. was still booming post-pandemic. So this might just be a New York phenomenon. But it's like any of these trend stories, Jill. It's hard to cast a wide net here across all of Gen Z in every town in America. But this is a trend, at least some restaurateurs here in New York are noticing.
Moshe, it's kind of like when we reported that, Tuesday is like the new Thursday or something like that, because people who are working hybrid are off on Friday or working from home on Friday and Monday. Right. And so the hardest reservation to get in the city is now a Tuesday night, where it used to be a Thursday, but now people are taking off and heading wherever they're going to go on Thursday. They just want to get there. So look, the pandemic has changed things. I don't know if it is necessarily a Gen Z thing, but I do find these trend stories and just the way we live type of stories post-pandemic to be fascinating.
Oh, totally fascinating. Work culture, dating culture, drinking culture. And Jill, it wasn't so long ago, we millennials were getting the short end of the stick, being like, oh, those millennials, they're not doing this and they don't believe in this. So now Gen Z, it's your turn. So, that's what happens. and then alpha generation, they're coming up behind you. So soon enough, you'll be like, we weren't like that. I can't believe these alphas.
Kids these days.
Alphas bringing happy hour back. Maybe it's up to, and most of them, they're not drinking age, but it's up to you kids.
What was the dig on millennials? They spent all their money on avocado toast.
Yes,
and
avocado
that
toast.
was like the big diss.
Oh, those millennials, those lazy millennials, avocado toast and travel.
That's right.
All right, we end here with On This Day in History. We begin in 1962. Major broadcast on this night, President John F. Kennedy alerting the American public that there's a Cuban Missile Crisis ongoing. Soviet-built missile bases under construction in Cuba, declaring a naval blockade to prevent further missile shipments. It came as Soviet ships were headed to Cuba. Major concern there that this could be the beginning of a nuclear war. The crisis actually started 8 days previous, but Kennedy had not told the public about it. He was trying to deal with it behind the scenes, but had gotten to the point where he had to address it in public. So he gives this national address on this day in 1962. And then for the next 6 days, the world watched as we teetered on the brink of nuclear war. Eventually, a secret deal would go down. The Soviets would relent publicly, dismantle their missile bases in Cuba, thanks to a secret deal with America for us to remove our missiles from Turkey, though we wouldn't admit at the time. Jill, it's one of the reasons why the national security establishment has always been accused of potentially assassinating JFK, because they very much wanted to go to war with the Soviets over what was happening in Cuba. And he said, no, we will not be invading Cuba. We will not be bombing Cuba or the Soviets. And so that's why there's the assumption that, the following fall, when Kennedy was assassinated, that the CIA, the Pentagon, others might have had something to do with it, reinforcing those theories. All right, on this day in 2012, Lance Armstrong was formally stripped of his 7 Tour de France victories. Jill, Lance Armstrong, before then, there was he could do nothing wrong. People wore those bracelets, the white,
Live
the
Strong.
yellow, the Live Strong yellow. Did you wear one of those?
I didn't, but I remember being floored when this news came out.
Right, it was just shocking. He had won 7 Tour de France's, and it turned out that he had doped, and then he received a lifetime ban from the International Cycling Union. All right, we end here with a bit of music history. The answer to my clue at the top. On this day in 1966, the Supremes, Diana Ross and the Supremes, become the first all-female group to reach #1 on the Billboard charts. And also on this day in 1966, speaking of bands, the Beach Boys, Good Vibrations makes its debut on this day, and it marked a new era of production for Brian Wilson. He recorded Good Vibrations in fragments so he could splice together sections on tape. So listen for it, and you're like, today we take all that editing for granted. Back then, they literally had to cut the tape and paste it together because they were dealing with actual tape. It wasn't digital.
Right, literal tape.
Literal cut the tape, trimming the tape, editing the tape. Anyway, and we end here with a more recent music history. On this day in 2021, Adele returned to the charts after a 5-year absence with her single "Easy on Me."
Moshe, this song, not to get too personal, has a little bit of significance to me. I was going through something a bit rough in my life at the time that it came out, and I found so much comfort in it. I kind of took it as being going easy on myself while I was going through it. And so go Adele. I will say I still listen to it, and it really comforts me, actually.
Thank you, Adele. Music can have quite the impact. So I imagine you're probably not the only person with a story related to that song or her other songs. So, very, very deep lyrics for Adele.
Yes, it was a reminder not to be so hard on yourself. Give yourself a break. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And don't forget to review us in the App Store.
The reviews matter, so appreciate all the reviews over on Apple and Spotify. And so, everyone, go easy on yourself today. We'll see you back here tomorrow.